Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to this first Impact Insight Toolkit Data Masterclass session. So my name's Mark Dunford, and I'm the lead analyst for Counting What Counts and for the Toolkit project. So my focus is on everything data, really. With me is Sean Tattersall, who I'm guessing most of you will already know. But if not, Sean's our customer engagement manager. And Sean's focus is on, I would say, helping MPOs to get the most value out of the toolkit and I guess generally providing excellent customer service. So we'll be taking you through these sessions together. I'm going to be focused on doing some presenting. So if you have questions and things as we go, you can drop those into the chat and Sean will be in there and can maybe answer some questions or curate them, and then we can talk about them at the end. So what are these sessions about? So the toolkit is a data-focused project. We're asking you to work with and think about data. So these sessions are trying to give you some background and kind of a walkthrough on how to do that, how to think about data and how to work with the data. So Sean has a series of tutorials and webinars that she runs, and those are focused on how to use the platform, how to get the most value out of the platform. These sessions are going to be focused on how to think about the outputs from the platform, so the data and the reports that we're getting out of the platform. So what is this first session about? So what I'm aiming to do is, if you're new to working with data, I would like to try and demystify data analysis a little bit. So I'm hoping that you're not quite as confused as this poor guy is here, who's literally on his knees and apparently in pain with confusion. But I hope you might be a little bit puzzled. So what I want to do is kind of give you a basic grounding in what we're trying to do with data analysis, so that you at least know what you do know and what you don't know, and can maybe come up with some extra questions that you'd like to ask, and just to give you a bit of a framework with which you can think about data. I'm not going to be focusing on technical skills like how to calculate certain statistics using Excel. It's more about the ideas and sort of a basic understanding of working with data. If you do already have a kind of a good understanding of data, it might be a little bit simple, but I'm hoping that still it will be good. It'll be an affirmation to hear that, you know, us talking about data and how to work with data, and hopefully will be in the same way that you think about data as well. So I'm hoping it will be valuable whether you're new to data or whether you're already got some existing skills. So what I'm going to do is I'll walk through a series of topics. We've got 6 topics. I'll go through each and just explain what I mean by that specific topic and how they relate to the toolkit. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions. It's only going to take me maybe 15 or 20 minutes to go through all 6 points. So we'll have plenty of time to talk at the end. And I'm going to try and do this in as simple a way as possible so that it should be easy to access. Okay, so the first point is we need art-form knowledge and data for effective analysis. So although the toolkit is a data-focused project, data is not supposed to replace the experience that you have and others have. It's providing something extra to supplement that personal experience. So that's because data has strengths that it brings, but there are weaknesses to data as well. The strength of data is that it's free of personal opinion or bias. So it doesn't matter if you have 2 people and they both send the same survey to the same audience, they will get the same answer. It doesn't matter what opinions those people have beforehand, the data they collect will be free of bias, free of their opinion. So that's the strength. But the weakness with data is that we can only really collect data and measure a tiny part, a tiny piece of the puzzle. So, you know, we're sending out surveys with 10 or 12 questions in them. There might be thousands of different sort of unique qualities to the work that we're evaluating that the audience might pick up on. And we're only asking questions of a small number of people when there might be a much larger group of people who experience the work. There might be things that happen on that particular day which influence the way that they think, which we can't capture. So what we can only do is capture data on a specific part of the problem. And that's the weakness. So what we have to do is you have to combine the data, which is that bias-free, objective part, with the knowledge that you have. So I'm guessing you'll have knowledge about your art form, you'll have knowledge about your organization, you'll have knowledge about the specific work that's being evaluated, and we try and fit the data into that knowledge, and together between the two things that you get a kind of more complete and more accurate picture of what's happening. So for effective analysis, we need both knowledge and data. But when we say data analysis, what does that actually involve, and what are actually we trying to do? So I think the work to do data analysis can basically be categorized into two parts. The first part is using statistical techniques to summarize the collected data. So if you send out a survey, you might get thousands of data points, and there's no way you could possibly read through all of those data points and make sense of them. I mean, you'd probably die of boredom if you tried. So what you do is you use charts, you use statistics, and what it does, that makes it possible for you to access the information which is in that data. So the first part is just that, building charts, calculating statistics. And then the second part is the actual understanding and interpreting part. And really the second part is, in my opinion, the more difficult part, is how do you make sense of the data that you're looking at. And in the toolkit, the first part is mostly done for you, in the sense that the insights reports are generated automatically. There's charts in there already. So what we're going to be focusing on in the toolkit is understanding and interpreting the data that's been summarized in those reports. And that's all data analysis is. It's work to summarize data, and then it's work to understand the summarized data. So that's what we're talking about, and that's what we're trying to do. So the third point, there are a couple of analogies in this presentation, which I hope you like analogies, is we should approach interpreting data like doing detective work. So if we think about what a detective is, it's someone with lots of experience within maybe a specific area of crime. They're asked to investigate a crime, and they'll have an idea about what might have occurred based on past experience, based on what they know about that type of crime. And then what they do is they look for clues, they look for evidence which supports their ideas, or if they find clues which don't make sense, then they have to change their ideas based on the evidence that they find. And approaching data analysis is the same sort of process. So a data analyst is someone with lots of experience within a specific domain. And for you, that will be your particular art form, your organization, and the work that's being evaluated. You might have an idea about what happened, based on what you saw. You might think that event was a success. This is what the audience might have thought. These sorts of these things which took place might have affected the way that they felt. And then when you're looking at a report and you're looking at data, you're looking for clues which support the ideas that you have, or which might tell you otherwise. So the process of interpreting data is like being a detective. And now just to take that analogy just one step further, as you know, in the toolkit, we ask you to submit the reports when you finish them to your relationship manager. So if you think about a detective, they might have an idea, and they might have collected evidence, and they might write a report which says, here's what I think, here's the evidence that I found. Based on that evidence, this is how I would describe what happened at this particular crime. And then they might share that report with their colleagues, and they talk about it together, and their colleagues might agree, they might have questions, they might disagree. Maybe they've got some different past experience which might cause them to interpret the clues and the evidence in a different way. And that process of sharing the report with an RM is the same sort of process. They've probably got similar but different experience to yours, and maybe they have a different idea, or maybe they agree with what you've said. And between the two of you, you can come to the most likely understanding and an agreement of what actually happened based on the evidence that you're working from, evidence that comes from the reports. So the fourth point is data doesn't have to surprise you to be valuable. And the reason I'm raising this is I think often we have this idea that we should only be trying to collect data on things that we have no idea about. And that's not the case. So if you think about scientific method and how science works, it starts with a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is an idea about the way that something is. So in this case, this guy has a hypothesis, I think the car is blue. And then what a scientist does is they devise a test or an experiment where they can observe and they can collect data which tells them whether their hypothesis is correct or not. So in this case, the person might observe the car to test the hypothesis, and they see that the car is blue or the car is green. Now, obviously the blue car, that's what he expected, and the green car is a surprise. But both of these things are valuable. Until you observe that the car is blue, you don't know for sure that your idea is correct. So, an example might be thinking that we don't need to ask the age of our audience because we know that our audience it's older, we have an older demographic. But unless you actually ask people, you're just basing that on your personal opinion, which might be influenced by bias. So you observe data, you see what happens, and then you can know for sure. So both of these outcomes have something to provide. So if we think about this in the toolkit, you might have a hypothesis that the work is challenging, and then you test that by observing, and either the audience did find it challenging or they didn't find it challenging. And both of these have something to provide in that you've confirmed your ideas when you've observed it with bias-free data. Or if you find out that you're wrong, it might not feel very nice, but unless you observe that you are wrong, you're going to continue with the wrong idea. And maybe because you have the wrong idea, you might be making decisions which aren't as good, aren't as high quality. So sometimes finding out that you're wrong means that in the future you can adjust your opinions and go on with a better idea. So that's the fourth point. The fifth point is there might be many interpretations which fit the data. So another analogy coming up, and I've tried to make this as simple as possible, and I hope it still makes sense from this analogy. So I said before that we can only collect data on a small part of the puzzle. Well, if you imagine that you're looking through a keyhole and you see this eye and you see some white fur, you're only looking at a small part of the picture. And we're trying to kind of put together a guess of the whole picture based on the small bit that we can observe. So what makes a good guess for this? So there are many guesses that fit the data. It might be a cow, a polar bear, a horse, a dog. Based on the data that we can see, all of these things fit the data. But we have to bring our own knowledge and extra things that we know about to bear as well when we're trying to make an interpretation of the data that we're seeing. So if we know that we're stood outside and we're looking inside, well, then it's probably not a cow and it's probably not a horse. And if we also know that we're not in the Arctic, then that also probably rules out polar bear. So we can end up with an interpretation that this is going to be a dog. And it is a very cute little dog. So the point being that when you're looking at charts and when you're looking at diagrams, it's not that it's not like a maths puzzle or a maths question where there's a right answer and a wrong answer. There might be many answers that work. And what you have to do is you have to filter down those answers based on the knowledge that you have, the expertise that you have, to come to an explanation which fits the data, but also makes sense based on an explanation that you can come up with, based on the knowledge that you have. So that's the fifth point. And the sixth point is the toolkit research question. So research processes are driven by research questions. And this is what the process looks like. It starts by posing a research question, and then you design a study which allows you to answer that question. You collect data, you analyze the data, and then you try to answer the question. And in the toolkit, I think we focus on these middle three parts of the process a lot. So we have the dimensions as quality metrics, and we use the self-peer public triangulation, and that's the study that's been designed. You send out surveys to the people who experience the work to collect data. And then we create insights reports and interpret those reports. And that's how we analyze the data. And we talk about that a lot. But I think we maybe don't stress enough the research question that this has been designed to answer. And the research question for this process in the toolkit is, have the creative intentions for this work been met? And those parts in the middle are designed around answering that research question. And the reason why I'm kind of reiterating this is that if you're looking at a report for the first time, or you're looking at a new dashboard type tool or something else data related, which is new to you, every data point might look interesting, or maybe every data point is irrelevant. And it can be difficult to know where to start and how to start thinking about that. And the research question can help organize the way you think about data and how you can think about a report when you're approaching interpreting it. So it's sort of like a compass that can help guide the way that you're thinking. So if you're finding yourself looking at reports and there's a lot of stuff in there and you're not quite sure where to start, if you just reiterate the question to yourself, so we're trying to answer, have the creative intentions been met? And start thinking in terms of that research question, it should provide you a bit of a compass and where to go next. So I will just put all that together and summarize it a little bit, and then we can hopefully go to some questions. So it's all about interpretation. You are likely the best placed person to do the interpretation because you're the user for the toolkit, so you understand the toolkit, but you've also got good knowledge about your art form, good knowledge about your organization, you've got good knowledge about the work that's being evaluated, and you're probably the only person that has that combination of expertise. So you're best placed to do the interpretation. The charts and the diagrams only aid the interpretation, but they're not the answer. It's not like a maths question where there's a right and the wrong. You use your knowledge in combination with the charts and diagrams to interpret what we're looking at. You can approach the interpretation like a detective. So you have an idea and then you're looking for clues which support your idea or maybe tell you otherwise. We don't just want to highlight things which are surprising or unusual. We can also highlight things which confirm what we expect. A correct interpretation, of which there might be many, but a correct one is one that fits the data and has an informed explanation. So you want to explain why you think the interpretation that you're putting forward is the right one, how it fits the data. And you want to keep the research question in mind to help guide and organize your thinking. So that's the end of the interpretation, not interpretation, presentation, interpretation on the brain. And now we can go to some questions if anybody has some.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's great. So I don't know about you all, but that's definitely got some cogs whirring in my mind. So if you have questions, please feel free to, you can either write them in the chat or you can unmute yourself if you prefer to talk. That's also absolutely fine. Please do feel free to do so. It's always one of the most sort of interesting aspects of these like webinar sessions is hearing about your perspective on it and if there's anything that we can support you with, because otherwise, you know, it could just be a standard support film like we have on our YouTube channel. So it definitely is one of sort of the highlights, is actually hearing from you directly. So please do feel free to impart thoughts, questions. Please go for it. Okay, so you've got a question here from Kathy. What percentage of an audience would you aim to have responses from in order for the data to be representative?
Yeah, so we have guidance on the website. The reason there is guidance is because there isn't a black or white answer. So it depends on the size of the audience and other things as well. So I would recommend that you go and look at that guidance, because that was the piece of guidance which is on there was something which I put together using kind of the broad data set that we've got so far. If you have a very small audience, then it tends to be that you need a high percentage, just because if you've only got 10 people and you've interviewed 2, when you interview that third person, it can make a big difference on the average. Whereas if you've got 20 people who've already been surveyed and you interview a 21st, that 21st person makes a smaller impact on the whole group. So as you get a smaller audience, you'll need to survey a larger percentage. Is a general rule, but I'd recommend looking at that guidance for a specific answer for your use case.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hi Anne.
Hi. It was just about a general sample size. So if your sample size is less than 100, it just feels, there's something that feels a bit wrong about converting something to a percentage if you've got a very small sample size.
I'm not sure what you mean by a percentage. As in, a percentage is just it describes this. You could convert, you know, if your sample size was 100,
Yeah.
if your audience was 100, then that would be 100%. If your audience was 1,000, that would be 10%. So you could always convert it into a percentage. Is your question to do with like margin of error? And, you know, a small sample size means that it might not be representative.
I guess so. It's like if you only had, so say you were running a focus group of 10 people and 3 people gave a particular response, it feels a little bit wrong to kind of say, well, that's about 30% of people.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? It kind of, if you convert it to a percent, it feels like it's more authoritative somehow.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. So that's why when you're calculating those averages and you say that, you know, that's 30%, you would have a margin of error, and that margin of error basically describes how confident you are. So it's sort of a bad habit in statistics, and you'll see this in the news all the time, where people will report a precise number like 30%, and in fact what they mean is it's somewhere between 10% and 60%, but 30% is in the middle.
Yeah.
And you are correct. If you have if you surveyed 1,000 people and 300 of them answered the same, saying 30% is much more confident than it would be if you'd only surveyed 10 people and 3 of them had answered the same.
Yeah.
And the difference would be you'd have a bigger margin of error.
Yeah.
I think in the case of the toolkit, so just to compare what we're doing to what the audience agency is doing, because I know they suggest a sample size of 380. It's different to the audience agency because what they're trying to do is that 380, it's for the entire year, whereas the sample sizes that we're recommending are for an individual event. So there's, you know, the pool of people that we're trying to represent is much smaller. So the sample sizes that we ask for are smaller. So that's kind of the main difference there. And I think also the challenge that we have is that many organizations have, you know, the work doesn't reach as many people in the sense that they have only a small audience, but they might have a bigger impact per person, you know, based on the work that they're doing. So we're trying to give rules which are somewhat flexible so that it's still possible for people to follow the process. But, you know, in general, you'd want to aim to have a higher sample sizes if you can. So, you know, in your example of 10, you'd want to have, if you've got smaller audiences, like I said before, you want to be able to sample more of them. But yeah, I don't.
Okay.
I'm sort of, there's so much on this topic that it's difficult to give you a concise answer to the question.
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, often if you've got a specific situation that you're looking at where this is a problem, I'd be happy to talk about it offline as well, and maybe give you a more helpful answer instead of a general one.
Yeah, and please do feel free to email either myself or Simone with your question and, you know, further information, and we will then pass it on to Mark, who will be able to take it from there. So Mark's always really happy to, you know, to sort of have those conversations with people on a one-to-one basis, just as we are. So please do sort of make the most of it, make the most of him and his expertise. So I've got a question here from Marita. How can you ensure or assess that the responses you receive to a survey are representative of your audience?
That again, it comes down to sample size. So there will be 2 things which affect how representative it is. One of them is the sample size, which means that if you send surveys to all of your audience and then half of them respond, then you'll have 50% of your audience which have responded. So that's a sample size of 50%. And the other thing which might affect how representative it is response bias. So that might mean that, say, younger people are more likely to respond to the survey than older people. That second one is much more difficult for us to measure. There isn't a black and white rule that I could give you to assess the second one. You might be able to assess that by saying, if you know that your audience is particularly is older, and yet everybody who answers your surveys is very young, you might use that to find out that perhaps you're not getting a representative sample. But the main thing that I would recommend that you focus on is just the number of responses. And like I mentioned earlier, and Sean sent that link, we do have guidance on the website which suggests the number of the sample size that you want to aim for. So it will give you specifically, if your audience is between 100 and 150 people, then here's how many survey responses you want to aim to receive. And if you get that number of responses, then that's going most of the way to ensuring that your survey is representative of your audience for that particular work. And Marita, I'm glad that does answer your question.
So for those of you that don't know, we will be doing another session in March, which sort of builds on this. So I don't know if Mark, if you want to say a little bit about what will be happening in March. I think the majority of you have probably registered for that one as well. But yes, let's have a quick word from Mark about that.
Well, it's pretty brief. I mean, the next one, I'm actually just going to take an insights report, and I'll just go through a process of interpreting what's in the report. So, you know, the things that I've talked about here, I'll just be using those points that I've talked about to do an interpretation of the insights report, and I think of a summary report as well, just to show you how I do it, basically, and get to a good interpretation.
Great, thank you, Mark.
And then on the third, well, we do have a third session which has been rescheduled, which was going to be in April, which we will still be doing at some point. And then that third session will be focused on aggregate data. So if you think about an insights report, that's looking at data from one particular evaluation. And the aggregate data is, there's hundreds and hundreds of evaluations that have been carried out using the toolkit so far. And we can put all that data together and in an anonymized fashion and see if we can find sort of some interesting patterns when we look at a much bigger pool of data. So the third session will be looking at that. Great,
thank you. Yep, so essentially this was sort of your foundations, and then you're going to be building on this over the coming months. Yeah, Kathy, completely understand that some words such as aggregate can be a little bit scary, and that's exactly what we're aiming to sort of work through with you all. So please do, I'm going to say tune in, which feels a completely wrong word to use in this instance, but you know, so please do tune in to the future sessions, and hopefully we can alleviate some of the fear around data analysis. Yeah, so I don't know if any of you have any further questions at all. If you do, please feel free to speak to myself or Mark as we are here. Otherwise, you can, of course, always drop us a line afterwards. A little reminder, our general support email address is support@countingwhatcounts.co.uk. You can always get in touch with us, and we will forward the request to the appropriate person, so be it Mark or myself, and we will get in touch with you. So yes, thank you ever so much for joining. Mark, did you want to say something?
There was one I just wanted to respond, because Kathy mentioned that words like aggregate scare her, and so I just want to talk on that, which is that I think that's completely fine. I don't like jargon, and I try not to use jargon where I can, but I also do try to explain it if I do use jargon. So I would just say that if there are words like that are unfamiliar, please do ask what they mean. But even though I may sometimes use jargon, I think it's really important that when I'm talking to you about data, and when we as Counting What Counts talk to you about data, we do sometimes use the jargon that's commonly used, just because otherwise you'll be talking a different language to the rest of the world when it comes to data. So it's another thing that it would be good for us to expose you to some of these terms, so that if you do want to do your own bit of Googling at some point, or you look at something else to do with data, it might be familiar to you because we've used some of the language before in some of these sessions. So don't feel stupid if you don't know. Please do ask. We don't like jargon, but it's good for you to pick up on it anyway. That was the last thing I would add on that.
Fabulous. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and we hope to see you in March. So yes, have a wonderful day. Enjoy the sunshine if you can. All right.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.